All right. So, starting to plow into the 10 points of the plan, let's start with number one. Number one is the national debt. And that's probably the biggest one to me. I think people underestimate what a big problem that is. National debt now is over $38 trillion. I think debt to GDP is over 125%, which is the neighborhood where countries start to become insolvent. Um, Per capita debt is around 112,000 per person, over 300,000 per individual taxpayer. And soon the debt payments alone, or the interest payments alone, will be more than the defense budget. And then they'll start to, and they're growing every year. So it'll start to subsume the Social Security, Medicare. The debt payments themselves will start to become more than the budget, which is not sustainable to say the least. Um, I think people I think have the perception of like, well, if it's 112,000 per person, I can't pay it. I don't have $112,000. You can't make me pay $112,000. You're going to pay it. I'm going to pay it. You're going to pay it. We're all going to pay it. And what really strikes me about all this is the people aren't the ones who voted for this spending. They're not the ones who got the benefit from this spending. Who drove this spending are the lobbyists, the special interests, the industries, the corporations that all went to Congress and the presidents and said, well, we want spending for this and we want some money for that. International countries come and with their lobbyists and say, we want some to support this conflict and we want aid to this country, and so on until this whole thing balloons into $38 trillion. But what really bothers me about the whole thing is they're not going to come back and pay for it. When push comes to shove, these corporations aren't going to pay this debt back down. All these special interests, these lobbyists aren't going to pay it down. The banks aren't going to pay that down. We learned that in 2008. Ultimately, and these countries, these international countries, aren't going to come and kick in to help pay the debt down. Ultimately, they're going to have you and me pay it. And you say, well, how? I don't have $112,000. If they don't raise taxes on everybody across the board, which they could do, what the way that they'll do it is you're going to end up paying it through other means, like inflation. That's why we've seen this inflation over the past few years. You're starting to see it now. You're going to pay for it through increased grocery costs, increased power bills, energy costs, increased gas costs. You go to buy a house, the houses are more expensive. Interest rates on everything is higher. You go to get a car loan or a house mortgage, the interest rates, you're going to pay for it there. You're going to pay the bank that way. You're going to pay for it. One way or another, they're going to make everybody pay for it. And that's where this is headed. What I'm proposing is a plan to say, we're not going to pay for it. The people who created this bill are going to pay for it. And that's my plan here. So I'm going to lay out the four steps to this plan. That's the way I'm going to approach all of these points to my 10-point plan. Each one is going to have a specific strategy with specific steps on how we're going to accomplish each one of these. So how do we bring this debt down to zero? I have a 4-step plan here. Before I get into the 4-step plan, let me say this. As I go through this, I'm not just going to throw out fanciful ideas of like maybe we could do this or somehow we'll magically do that. I realize that some things are within the direct control of the president and that he can do unilaterally. And I'll call those things out. Some things the president doesn't have control over, things that need to be approved by Congress. And I'm going to explain how we can approach those things as well. So this is an example of one of those things where it's not within the unilateral control of the president. It needs to go through Congress. But the way we'll do that is we would propose, in this case, we're going to propose what to do. And in 2028, I implore everybody who agrees with this plan and this strategy to vote against any Republican and Democrat and vote in an independent, people with fresh blood and fresh eyes who are open to these solutions. And then hopefully we can work with them and get some of these things done in 2029, 2030. However, if by through 2029 to 2030 you see the senators and the congressmen vote against these things that the people want, like bringing the debt back down, reducing inflation, if they vote against those things, we're going to call them out on the White House website. Not attacking people on personal levels, but simply calling them out to say, okay, on this debt issue, how did your senator and your representatives, your congressman vote on this issue? They voted against your interest and with the interest of the corporations. We suggest that you vote otherwise in the 2030 election when they're up, and so on. And then that would give us 2031 and 2032 to make more progress on these issues. And again, by 2032, call them out and say, look, clearly this person is voting against your interest and for their donors' interests. So you should vote against them. And I'm hoping by in those 3 cycles from 2028 to 2030 to 2032, we will then get rid of most of these people who these representatives from both parties that are not interested in what the people want. That's my approach. Okay, so back to these 4 points. Number one, how do we make the people who generated this debt now be responsible for it? I would propose, number one, to introduce a debt tax, and the debt tax would be an extra tax on in addition to the income taxes that wealthy individuals and corporations have to pay each year until this debt comes back down to zero. It's an extra tax to deal with the debt that they generated. So, for example, you might take individuals that make more than $1 million in income per year, and they have to pay an extra 5%. Or corporations that make more than $100 million per year will have to pay an extra percentage in debt tax to bring this down. However, a lot of these wealthy individuals don't take their money as income. They hide it as assets, which I'll talk about in point 2. So I also would introduce an asset tax to get at that money. So, for example, if you have assets greater than $500 million, maybe, just to throw out a crazy high number, obviously you should pay a 1% of assets until this debt comes back down to zero. And that's just going to be what it takes. That's the only way that you're going to get this debt back down to zero eventually, is each year you pay an extra debt tax on the wealthy people, the donors and the lobbyists, the corporations who generated this. So that's my first point. And by the way, let me say, I'm personally not a huge fan of federal income taxes, primarily because of where it goes. It goes to corporations and it goes to international. I think people would be more at ease with paying federal taxes. They'd like to pay their federal taxes if we knew that we all got a benefit from it, but we generally don't. It generally goes to these special interests, so they're the ones who should pay for it. Point 2 is I would propose a tax to close tax loopholes. For example, as I mentioned briefly, people with high income, they tend to hide their assets as hide their income as assets rather than taking them as current income, because it's not taxed under the income tax. It's an asset. That's called the carried interest loophole. They also take loans against their assets, so they don't have to liquidate the assets. They take a loan against the asset, and then get around paying federal taxes that way. So I would propose to close those. I mean, to some extent, if we have an asset tax, that gets around that, but we can close that further by closing some of these tax loopholes they use to get around the income tax. That's point 2. Point 3 is I would cut all federal spending on international foreign interests and countries until the debt is back down to zero. And that is whether you want to call it military aid, foreign aid, military assistance, whatever you want to call it, or whatever the country is, or whatever the cause is, we're not paying it anymore. And there's one country, for example, that every year, just built into the federal budget without even argument or discussion, every year they just get billions of dollars sent to them. It's just embedded in the budget every year. And then on top of that, there's extra payments that are also negotiated and discussed and voted on. That's crazy. Maybe if you had no debt, you could talk about, well, I like this cause or that cause, or maybe some people listening to this would say, yeah, but this one country is really good and we really should do that, or this one conflict is really important and we gotta spend on that. Well, I'm sorry, there's no money left. The credit card's maxed out. No more spending on any foreign interest. No more payments to other countries until the debt's back down to zero. And number four is less of an action item and more of a contingency. So whenever you talk about things like this, like increasing an income tax on extremely wealthy individuals or corporations to bring down the debt, people say, yeah, but they'll leave the country. And so my response to that, in fact, the current president said that when there was a discussion around raising taxes on the wealthy to pay down the debt, he said they'd leave the country. Well, there's a response to that. If you want to skip out on your bill now, and you created all this debt, and that now that we need to pull together and pay it, you want to leave? Okay, goodbye, leave, don't come back, but you're going to pay an exit tax. And on the way out the door, we're going to take 1/3 of your assets, and then you can go wherever you want to go. Same thing with corporations. If you want to relocate to another country, you're going to pay an exit tax. And that's not an original idea of mine. There are countries that do that. We could do that too. So we're all going to band together and pay off this debt that you generated, and hopefully you'll be part of the solution. If you want to just leave, that's fine. You'll leave assets on the way out. So again, I like to talk about these things in terms of actions and measurables. How would I actually do this? Year one, President introduces the budget with these cuts to international spending and these additional debt tax increases on wealthy individuals and wealthy corporations, and that would be in the budget proposed to Congress. Anybody that votes against this and against the interests of all of us who bought into this mandate and want this solution will name and shame them that these people are working against the will of the people. And I would also say that I, as president, would not agree on any budget that does not reduce spending, does not increase taxes on wealthy individuals and corporations in order to bring down this debt, and doesn't put us on a trajectory to bring it down to zero. We've seen this shutdown recently. I would say go ahead and shut everything down, and that will indirectly reduce the debt also, by the way. Other than I would continue to fund and spend on the essentials, the mandatory payments, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. We can agree to continue funding those, but I won't agree to any other budget items that don't include the cuts. And I'll talk about more cuts in point two, and the increased taxes. And then in year two, we would continue on that with the budget, and then continue to negotiate loophole legislation to close those other loopholes. And then we would continue that through 2029, 2030, and then 2030, we would name and shame anybody who has not who has voted against these proposals, and then hopefully people will vote them out again vote those people out in 2030. 2030 we'll get some new people, and then continue that work in 2031, 2032. Anybody that's left voting against the tide can be voted out as well, and that would be the way to get all the Democrats and Republicans who are against this out of the system. All right, and then ultimately we would continue doing this until we got that debt down to zero, and then at that time we can talk about reverting taxes to past levels and getting rid of some of these extra taxes. All right.